For nearly 40 years, one company ruled the creative world. Whether it was editing photos, designing logos, creating advertisements, or producing Hollywood movie posters, there was one name every designer knew: Adobe, Photoshop, Illustrator, Premiere Pro, Acrobat. Its software wasn't just popular, it became the industry standard. Universities taught it, companies demanded it. Millions of creative professionals built their careers around it. If you wanted to become a designer, learning Adobe wasn't optional, it was expected. By the early 2000s, Adobe had become so dominant that challenging it felt almost impossible. The company generated billions of dollars every year, served millions of customers worldwide, and had decades of technological expertise behind it. No startup seemed capable of changing that. Then, more than 9,000 miles away from Silicon Valley, a young entrepreneur in Australia noticed something everyone else had accepted. Design software had become incredibly powerful, but it had also become incredibly complicated. Even creating something as simple as a classroom poster or a social media graphic often required hours of learning and expensive software that many people couldn't afford. Most professionals saw that complexity as normal. She saw it as an opportunity. While Adobe continued building tools for professional designers, she imagined something completely different. What if anyone could design? No expensive software, no complicated tutorials, no years of training, just open a browser and start creating. To almost everyone in the industry, the idea sounded unrealistic. Why would professionals abandon software they had trusted for decades? And why would beginners care enough to create designs in the first place? Those doubts would follow her for years. But what nobody realized was that this wasn't just the beginning of another startup. It was the beginning of a rivalry that would force one of the most powerful software companies in the world to rethink its future. Long before Canva became one of the world's most valuable software companies, it started with a simple frustration. Not inside Silicon Valley, not inside a billion-dollar startup, but inside a classroom in Perth, Australia. A young university student named Melanie Perkins was teaching graphic design to other students. Every semester, she noticed the same pattern. Her students weren't struggling because they lacked creativity. They were struggling because the software was incredibly difficult to learn. Programs like Photoshop and Illustrator were powerful, but mastering even the basics could take weeks. Many students spent more time learning the tools than actually designing. Melanie couldn't stop asking herself one question: why does creating something simple have to be so complicated? That question became an obsession. Instead of accepting the industry as it was, she imagined something completely different. What if design software lived in a web browser? What if it worked with simple drag-and-drop tools? What if anyone, not just professional designers, could create beautiful designs in minutes? At the time, the idea sounded almost impossible. This was 2007. Cloud software was still in its early days. Most investors believed professional creative software had to remain complex. After all, Adobe had spent decades proving exactly that. But Melanie wasn't trying to replace Photoshop. She was trying to build something Adobe had never prioritized: a tool for everyone else. To test the idea, she launched a small online business called Fusion Books, a platform that helped schools design yearbooks without requiring professional design skills. It wasn't famous. It wasn't a billion-dollar company. But it proved something incredibly important. People didn't want more complicated software. They wanted software that simply worked. Encouraged by that success, Melanie and her co-founders began dreaming much bigger. They called the new idea Canva. There was just one problem. Almost nobody believed it would ever succeed. Building Canva wasn't the hardest part. Convincing people it was possible was. Melanie Perkins believed she had discovered a problem hiding in plain sight. Millions of people wanted to create presentations, posters, social media graphics, and invitations. But professional design software felt intimidating. Investors didn't see an opportunity. They saw a fantasy. Again and again, the answer was the same: no. The idea was considered too ambitious. Some believed ordinary people didn't care enough about design. Others argued Adobe already owned the market. Why would anyone choose a simpler tool over software trusted by the world's best designers? For most founders, dozens of rejections would have ended the journey. For Melanie, they became motivation. She spent years refining the product, improving the vision, and pitching anyone willing to listen. Eventually, that persistence paid off. In 2013, Canva officially launched. At first, it looked harmless: A free website with drag and drop templates, no complicated toolbars, no endless menus, no steep learning curve. To many professionals, it looked almost too simple. But that simplicity was exactly the point. Canva wasn't trying to replace Photoshop for Hollywood artists or professional photographers. It was opening the door for millions of people who had never considered themselves designers, teachers, students, small business owners, marketing teams, content creators, people who didn't want to spend months learning software. They just wanted to create. And almost overnight, they embraced it. Millions of users signed up. Businesses adopted it. Schools introduced it into classrooms. Marketing teams that once relied on professional designers could suddenly produce graphics themselves. While Adobe continued serving experts, Canva was quietly building an entirely new generation of creators. By the time the industry realized what was happening, this wasn't just another startup anymore. It had become a movement. For years, Adobe had defined the rules of digital design. If you wanted professional results, you learned Adobe. That had never been questioned. Until Canva changed the question entirely. Instead of asking, how can we build better design software? Canva asked, how can we make design effortless? That single shift changed everything. Within a few years, Canva wasn't attracting professional designers. It was attracting everyone else. Teachers creating lesson plans, small businesses designing advertisements, startups building presentations, content creators making thumbnails. Millions of people who had never opened Photoshop suddenly had a tool they could learn in minutes. The market Adobe had largely overlooked had become enormous. Canva's growth accelerated at an astonishing pace, expanding to millions of users across more than 190 countries. Businesses, schools, and nonprofits adopted it because it lowered the barrier to creating professional-looking designs. Adobe couldn't ignore it anymore. The company responded by expanding its own browser-based and simplified creative tools, including Adobe Express, while continuing to strengthen its professional software ecosystem. The battle was no longer about who had the most powerful features. It was about who could empower the most creators. Today, Adobe remains the industry leader for professional creative work. Canva hasn't replaced Photoshop for Hollywood studios or advanced designers. Instead, it created something entirely different. A new generation of creators who never needed Photoshop in the first place. And that's what makes this rivalry so fascinating. The biggest disruption didn't come from building a better version of Adobe. It came from building a product for people Adobe was never truly designing for. Sometimes the greatest threat to an empire isn't another empire. It's someone who changes the rules of the game.